Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, everyone. I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optidge Marketing Professor and the host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Today, I'm super excited on this special Office Hours episode with Caroline Pham, Senior PPC Consultant. Caroline is a Senior PPC Consultant with a diverse and award-winning background. She's worked across digital marketing companies both in-house and with ad agencies with results-based marketing strategies across many verticals, including e-commerce, technology, real estate, and more. She has a passion for search marketing, and we're thrilled to have her on the team. Today, we're going to talk about a lot of deep dive into PPC itself. We're going to talk about determining conversion goal types, budgets, return on ad spend, CPA, and cost per lead. How are you doing?
Good. Great. Happy to be here.
Yeah, just to give some background, my first major internship while I was doing my MBA was at Blinds.com. And at that time, Caroline was there. And we'll talk about Blinds.com in a little bit. But I worked closely with Caroline and learned a lot from her. So it's so cool how now we're working again together. And it's so nice to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Let's talk about where you went to school and what you studied.
Before I answer that question, I'm going to give some context because I think that it might help anyone who might be in the same situation as me and give some background into why I did what I did. So when I was in sixth grade, I won the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo Best in Show Award for my drawing of a Dalmatian puppy. Now, this Dalmatian puppy, he had a little red floppy fisherman's hat, and he had just finished tearing up the toilet paper in his family restroom. They printed my drawing on a T-shirt and sold it at the rodeo, and it was one of the proudest moments of my life. And from that moment on, I've always seen myself as a creative, artsy person. I will have to say that was probably the height of my artistic prowess, though. I've been in decline since then. But, that artistic, creative identification, it never went away. Artsy, creative. My report cards, on the other hand, they tended to lean more favorably towards math and science. But because of my creative, artsy identification, that's why I decided to go into advertising. The University of Texas at Austin had at the time and continues to have the #1 bachelor's in advertising program in the nation. And that's where I decided to get my degree.
And how did your parents feel about you going into advertising? Was it great, or was we really wish you'd choose something else?
So I think that might have been why I leaned so much into that artsy side of things, because I was kind of rebellious as a teenager, and they wanted me to be a doctor or lawyer, and a lot of parents do. And that was not it.
So tell me a little bit about the degree. I mean, obviously advertising and digital has changed a lot, but any moments that you can go back to while at the University of Texas that kind of shaped where you are today?
Yeah. So originally I saw myself working at a fancy ad agency, Mad Men style, but as a strong, empowered female and no cigars. But despite that initial desire, I found myself, when I was taking classes there, I found myself drawn most to my marketing, analytics, and statistics classes. I was naturally more good at those, and I found it easier, at least for me, to be persuasive from more of a quantitative standpoint rather than emotional, more as a matter of personality than anything else. I found, in my experience now that you have to be both. But at the time, that's where I felt more comfortable, that realm I felt more comfortable in. So very opposite from where I envisioned myself in the beginning and where I started. And I think one of the reasons why I had this shift in the change in direction is because it was around the same time that I started getting more into fitness and healthy living. And with healthy living, I found that the more information that I had, the more I tracked my food intake and exercise activity, for example, the more control I had over whether I achieved my goals or not, which is very similar to digital marketing, right? And that was it. That's how my digital marketing career began.
And from a health wise, is that something you actually started in college?
Yeah, it was something that I was pretty chubby as a as a kid.
I can never imagine that.
And so I had to turn that around.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. And it's so cool that the creative led you to the analytical. You need both, but it's cool that you had that because it's possible if you didn't have that moment, you never would have gone down that path.
Yeah. A career path is not always a straight line. It's not always what you think it's going to be. And that's just life. It's the journey.
So let's, before we dive into the meat of today, I know that blinds.com was your first in depth role in the digital marketing space, though you had worked at an agency, Apogee, before. As I've spoken with many people who worked at blinds.com, including myself, what was the experience like for you? And how did it influence your approach to digital marketing and PPC?
First and foremost, I am extremely grateful for the opportunity that I had at blinds.com. It was, I think that a lot of it was the right place, the right time, right people in combination with lots of hard work. I had a bunch of really, really good mentors there. So Avrami, which you know, Stephanie, Daniel, Jay, the team was fantastic. The culture was excellent. It was really a good environment for me to organically grow my skills. And that's really what it was. It was just organic growth and a lot of really, really, really hard work. Very good experience. I had the opportunity to work on some of everything. PPC, that's, what I'm really good at, but I did SEO, the shopping engines, display, affiliate, content marketing. Wise.com was we were one of the first vendors who worked with Wayfair and Amazon before they had any UI programs available. And yeah, it was cool to be able to have the opportunity to do that.
I know you're known so much for PPC, but I actually learned how to write, I believe, meta titles and meta descriptions from you. I don't know if
Yeah,
you
I
remember that.
remember that. Yes, I do remember that. Yes, and a lot of that stuff is still valid today. So
Totally. It has not expired yet.
yes, it's not.
When first setting up a PPC campaign, what is the first decision or element you like to look at?
It really depends on what the goal is. That's really, you can't answer any other questions unless you know what you're trying to do. And the goal is usually sales. It's almost always sales. Even if the goal is leads, it ultimately results in sales. But yeah, goals are usually sales, leads, traffic, impressions, some kind of action.
Do you ever find that you have to argue with, let's say, a client or a boss where they feel like the goal should be maybe more of a softer metric, but you're pushing for no, it's got to be, something more measurable like sales and leads?
Usually, if that situation happens, it's because there isn't a good measurement infrastructure. There isn't a very good connection between the offline and online sales, for example. That's usually the case where you have to look at a different kind of metric that is a pre-metric to the ultimate metric, which is sales. And that's where it gets a little bit fuzzier.
But I feel like these days it is a lot easier than, let's say, 10, 20 years ago to kind of combine those two, right? Things that happen offline, you can actually bring that into the platform and be able to optimize off of that.
Yes, it's a lot easier today, but depending on the client, for example, if you're like the places that I worked at, we've had brick and mortar stores, and we want to know what the impact of an impression of a digital ad has on a store walk-in. And
Yeah.
that's where it gets a little bit harder I mean, there's ways around it, but it gets a little bit fuzzier.
So once you decide what your goal conversion action is, once again, conversion, it could be a sale, it could be a lead, it could be an impression technically, but we don't really push for that. How do you then determine the number of conversions you want to aim for?
The number of conversions is going to be based off of the traffic volume, share of voice, your competition, and just you have to have an idea of what you think, how you're going to perform. So sometimes you have really good information to that because you have other advertising, you have other channels, you have other sources of information. Sometimes you have nothing. but it's almost always that's the formula is traffic, share of voice, which will help determine what your click-through rate is going to be, what you think your conversion rate is going to be, and then what your profit margin and revenue and profit margin will help determine what the goal should be and what you're trying to get.
So in a scenario where maybe some of this information is not so clear and apparent at the offset, are there like minimum budgets that you recommend in order to kind of get to the goal that you need? Or do you kind of leave it up to the client or to the, the company that you're working for to make that decision?
You're going to have an idea what the budget is going to look like if you have a pretty good understanding what the keyword areas are going to be. And so if you don't have an understanding of what keyword areas are going to be, it's going to be a little bit harder. But if you do, you're going to have a pretty close idea because Google will essentially tell you what it looks like trended over the year.
So you'll know what the CPCs are. So you get a pretty good idea of how much it's going to cost, and therefore what's the budget you need in order to get a certain amount of conversions.
Yeah, and what the search volume is going to look like. And I mean, the click-through rate part of it and the conversion rate part of it, those are usually unknowns in the beginning, unless you have other advertising going on.
Are there any like general like kind of baselines that you like to give? So like someone says, what's an average conversion rate? Do you ever throw that out?
So it depends on the industry and it depends on the type of if it's a lead or if it's a purchase on the website. So if it's a purchase on the website, it's really going to depend on the price of the item. I would give out ranges, but it's knowing that first information first. So like if you're selling like a $2,000 pool chair, then your conversion rate is going to be a lot lower than if you're selling a like $5 t-shirt.
Yeah, and I think that's why people will say, yeah, great conversion rate on an e-commerce website is 5%. But then that could be true when it is that t-shirt. But as you go up in pricing, I've seen with diamonds and jewelry, right? It is going to get smaller, and it doesn't mean that it's a bad conversion rate. It's just natural, right? The more expensive it's going to be, the less people are going to purchase.
Right. And it depends on who your competition is, right? Because if you're the only person that sells this item and it's something that people want, then you might have a really high conversion rate despite the high price. So there's just a lot of different factors at play. But you can come to what I'm trying to get at is that you can come to a pretty ballpark range of what is good for your industry.
So let's say you're tracking multiple types of conversions, because you can, right? For example, you could track purchases, add to carts, potentially people downloading PDFs.
Right.
So how would you break up the budget to go after those different conversions?
So it comes down to the customer journey and the different conversions, like the conversion rate to the next step. And so you kind of start with the end goal and what your break even is going to look like. And you have map out all the different typical steps that you think your customers, so I mean, okay, you can have what actually happened and you can have what you think is going to happen. And those are two different things and you can test it, right? But when you're starting out, you have an ideal path that you want to push your customers through. And then that's how you would work backwards and then assign value to each of the different steps. If you have the data, then you can map it out and then do the same thing. Without information, you start with kind of a framework and then you estimate and then you test and learn.
So I know I always like to push clients or companies to push as much money to the bottom of the funnel as possible. Do you feel the same way, or do you feel like maybe there's exceptions and sometimes you're like, hey, maybe we shouldn't put everything bottom and we should put money higher up in the funnel or mid funnel?
So I feel like I'm going to be saying this a lot, but it really depends on the client. But you're going to have money pages on your site, right? So like if you're in e-commerce, your money pages are your product pages. Like if somebody doesn't get to a product page, they can't add the product to the cart and then they can't purchase it. That's where the traffic has to go. If you're sending traffic to your homepage and it's not easy to get to a product page, then that's a problem. Right? If you are in a lead generating company and the whole purpose of, your leads come from either phone calls or from a form fill, then, all the paths need to lead to that form fill page, right? If it's hard to get to fill out the form, if it's hard to find a phone number, then you're not going to get the action that you want. And so, yes, pushing to the money sections, which is, call, form fill, or product page, and eventually add to cart. But yeah, kind of have to know what the path it is that you want your customers to take, what they are taking, and it just needs to make sense too from a search and landing page perspective.
So let's say you have a campaign with a goal to simply increase traffic to a website, which I don't recommend, but sometimes you have that. How does that campaign creation setup and strategy different from one that's very conversion based, like an e-commerce campaign that's aiming for actual checkouts and purchases?
Yes. So the major difference and first difference is probably going to be it's going to be more of you're trying to get the cheapest clicks you can get, right? Because that's how you're going to get the most traffic. So that's going to be the first major difference. And so the type of traffic that you're getting from lower CPC terms versus higher CPC terms is going to be vastly different. So your audience will be very different. That may work depending on what it is. If you know that you have a product, maybe it's an event where the more eyeballs you get on it, the more people are going to know and spread the word about it. And it's something that is short lived. Like I'm thinking more like an event kind of thing. It could make sense to send traffic for low CPCs. That might be what you want.
Kind of related, people will also have campaigns focused on building brand awareness. Maybe not as much on Google, but maybe you're doing it through Facebook, but you can do it through Google as well. So how do you determine what creative and value statements you want to highlight most?
Yeah, so this one is definitely more challenging. And depending on your brand and your company, you may not have a very well developed brand story, company story, value propositions. And so it's going to take, and if that is the situation, then you're going to want to see what your competitors are doing. And the first question, and this is for any business, even without any marketing, you need to know why somebody is going to want to do business with you. Like, what is it that makes you special? What is it that makes you better? What is it like? Why purchase from me? And that's what you're going to want to put into the ad to test out. If you have your brand is well established and you have a specific look or image, then I think it's a little bit easy. You want to even then it can be really hard because on the different mediums, the audiences can be very different. And so if you have available to you any kind of demographic information or like demographic indexes, that'll help you identify elements that your audience could potentially resonate with. Maybe like like golf, for example, golf, or like they watch the tennis a lot, or just those are just, and then you can test those different elements until you get a good quantitative benchmark of what works and doesn't work. So there's testing. So I said a lot of things here. So branding, value propositions, you're going to have, if you don't know what those are, you're going to test them out, having good understanding of your demographics, and then just a lot of testing.
In your experience, have you ever run into companies that like you tell them, hey, like, how are you different or special? And they're like, I don't know. I don't think I am. So what do you tell them? Like, oh, you shouldn't advertise, or?
No. So if they don't know, then that's where the competitive research is going to be really important. And so for paid search specifically, taking a really close look at the SERP page, seeing who's in the top spots for some top keywords, what they're saying, what their prices or what their value propositions look like, and then just picking something that you think is going to resonate with the audience.
I have like a funny story with that. So we did some advertising for a retail electricity provider. So the big deal was like, the competition was all doing 10 cents a kilowatt. So we're like, okay, we're going to do 9 cents. And like, we were doing great. But then, everyone caught on. And slowly all the other ads are like dropping down to 8 cents, and kind of interesting. So, you may have a competitive advantage for a little bit, but, sometimes the competition will catch on.
Yeah, price is a hard one because, just how low can you go, right? In my experience, it can't just be price. It has to be convenience or reviews or brand story, images. Maybe you show the product in use, or you have a lot of testimonial pictures of a completed product. Marketing can't happen in, what is the word? And it's comprehensive, it's holistic, right? So you have a paid search campaign, but the website needs to function at a certain level. The customer needs to know how to navigate intuitively your site, and it should be functioning and running quick enough so that it works on a phone or any device, right? So there's just some like minimum requirements, and not all companies meet those first minimum requirements. So that's the first part. I think that's the easier part to get past, actually. And then once you get past like the minimum requirements, is kind of understanding the intent and what your customer is looking for, and just getting it in the ad and on the landing page. Simple in theory.
Right. But like you said, you can't run it in a vacuum. You have to look at everything else. And just because you turn on, Google Ads doesn't mean that suddenly now everything's going to work perfectly. What are the pros and cons of cost per acquisition versus cost per lead? And how do you decide which to go with for a given client or campaign?
It's going to depend on what the client's typical lead to acquisition turnaround time is going to be. And so if like you are in an industry where like from the moment you get the lead, like it could take a year for you to convert a lead to an acquisition, then speed of information is going to be super important for digital marketing, because that's just the nature of digital marketing. And in that instance, if it's taking up to a year for a lead to potentially convert, then cost CPL is going to be better than CPA, just because it's a lot faster. I want to say that generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, if it takes more than 30 days for your lead to become an acquisition, then we're gonna want to lean more towards a CPO benchmark rather than a CPA, just for speed of decision making. That being said, it's really important to have an understanding of because a lot of times when you're starting out marketing, you don't know what that time is. Like you don't necessarily know unless you've been doing business for years and years that your typical turnaround time is a year. I mean, you should have an idea. The businesses should have an idea what it's going to be. There's that as well. Typically, the CPL is a really pretty good indicator of quality of the ad because somebody is going through and taking time to fill out a form.
I know we're talking more about Google Ads, but usually this comes up when we're running, like, let's say, a Facebook ad campaign. There's always the question, do we use, Facebook has the instant form that pops up. And there's always the question, do you run a campaign with that instant form, or is it better to send them to a landing page to fill out the form there? Typically what we see is, the form on Facebook gets you a lot more leads and your cost per lead is a lot less. But because it's so easy to fill out, often people just do it. Sometimes they forget that they even filled it out. That's like the weirdest thing that we find. So sometimes you want to send people, make it a little bit harder for them to fill out because then you actually know that they're interested. But it's always like, I think in the end, you have to test it, right? What's going to work best?
In the environment where you have a filled out form versus not a filled out form, I'm going to take the filled out form. It is something that you have to test. There's pros and cons to setting it up differently. And a lot of it does come down to how your sales team is going to convert that lead.
I think an earlier point that you made about, typically, sales cycles. I think that's why it makes it so hard for a lot of startups, right? When they're just starting off, they don't know exactly what's going on, what's their customer lifetime value, what should we consider to be, a significant, what a decent cost per lead. I think that makes it easier for people like you and me, right, to work with established businesses. But because those startups, it's difficult, right? There's a lot unknown.
Well, that is the benefit of working with an agency, is that the agency has a lot of information, a lot of benchmark metrics that they can help you, your company, establish what those goals are going to be.
Yeah, we were talking about that. Often people have the question, should I hire in-house? Should I hire an agency? And that's one of the really big advantages of an agency is that knowledge, not just from the individual who may be working directly on your account, but sort of the brain trust of everyone who's been in that agency. And it provides a lot of extra value. Any other thoughts on that?
Agency is going to have and always is always going to be on. If you have somebody, like if you have one person in house, that's what typically happens, right? If that person takes PTO, then you don't have anybody watching your accounts for you. Whereas that's not the case for the agency, right? And the agency has access to a lot more tools and information and skill sets than is individual person. Of course, it's going to depend on the agency. It's going to depend on the individual person. But those are some of the pros of going with an agency.
I want to talk a little bit about ROAS, or return on ad spend. And for those who don't know what that is, that means, when you spend $1 in advertising, how much money do you get back in return? So typically, you're going to find this with e-commerce, where you can actually measure the value. So if I spend $1 and I made $2 in sales, so my ROAS is, 2 times or 200%. These days people are putting values when it comes to, even like lead gen. And so you can do it. But
Yeah.
from your perspective, is there a general rule of thumb that you're aiming for regarding ROAS? Is there a target? I know, once again, I'm sure it's going to depend, but how do you approach that?
Yeah. So the inputs that I look at are like, what is your profit margin? What are your marketing goals? Are you trying to be more aggressive? Are you more conservative? Are you more experimental? And that will help determine what the ROAS should be. And usually you can you establish a break even ROAS. So this is like ultimately where I make nothing, but I'm not losing any money, right? And then you go from there. Like, if I'm more conservative, then you're going to pad it up a little bit more than if you're more aggressive, you might be okay losing some money just to get some traffic or some sales going. But the break even ROAS is a really, really good starting point to kind of get an idea of where you should be.
But when it comes to break even ROAS, how long would you say? And I know it will depend a lot on the the owner of the business, what their level of taking. But like from, let's say, an outside consultant, outside perspective, how long do you think one can run like a break even ROAS type of campaign?
A lot of companies run break even campaigns all the time. That's the truth, because it's about, a lot of times it's about, this is speaking for bigger companies, a lot of times it's about traffic and just getting volume of sales more so than it is about actual profit. But if it depends. It depends on the company. It depends on like what else you're doing and where your sales are coming from. And because if you're a company that has like online is new to you and you have like more sales coming off from offline, then it'll be more okay for you to be at break even or losing money online than elsewhere, right? That's not always the case. If you're completely, if your business is completely online, then, and every business needs profit to run. Okay, it depends also if you're like a business that's trying to grow users too, because when you have seed funding, then that's going to be different too. So it depends. Not profit is not what I'm saying is not every business has profit as a goal. As weird as that sounds.
No, you're right. But based off of that, would you say, like, obviously it's a lot easier to get to a break-even campaign rather than someone who wants 10, right? A 10 ROAS. When someone approaches you and say like, I want an 8 ROAS or a 10 ROAS, like, does that shock you? Or is it like, oh no, we can get there?
Let's just say somebody comes in and they just heard from somebody else that they talked to about marketing that this is a good number. And then they're just attached to that number. That number to me doesn't mean anything.
Good.
Because it's your number is your number and it's based on your goals and your business performance, your own individual business performance. And if that number doesn't exist, there's the comfort, like if it doesn't exist, and even if you don't know what your margins are, there is comfort level of what you're comfortable with. And that would be the starting number rather than just out of the blue, a number that you're fixating on. That's not based off of any kind of data. There's a way to come up with a logical number, even if it's not one that you're 100% sure of, that's based on your business and your numbers, than just fixating on some random number because you think that's what you should be at.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that's enlightening, should be enlightening for a lot of people.
It's kind of like, like I, for the longest time, I wanted to weigh like 110 pounds or something, but that might not be physically possible for me. And that's not necessarily what is actually a healthy weight for me either, because you want to look at you, like what your goals are, what your body structure looks like, what your fat, what you're trying to do, and then you can come up with a number for you.
I think that's a very fitting parable. We touched upon budget a little bit before, but are there any tools or other outside things that you use in order to help you with recommendations for a good starting budget?
Before I answer this question, it's always speed. Speed to action is going to be like the number one goal, because you can spend forever getting as much information, trying to get everything perfect, but that's just not the reality of things usually, right? Speed to action is going to be, you want to lean towards getting things done. Okay, but now into the question. So typically, the easiest tool to use is the Google Keyword Planner. Your analytics, like your Google Analytics or whatever else you use, your Search Console, those are really, really good starting places, and most people have those already in place. If you have any other advertising, whether that's digital, whether it's offline, any sales information, your CRM, that information could be helpful to help establish goals, to help connect the dots, to help with conversion rates, even click-through rates. SEMrush and the like, there's a lot of tools like SEMrush, Heap. Yeah, those are typically where I would start with the free stuff before you get into paid.
Any tools which maybe are thrown out there that you're like, stay away from?
I haven't used a tool where that was like my initial thought is that this is just a crap tool. It just comes down to price. I think that a lot of these tools are getting really outrageous. Honestly, that's
I
just my
know.
personal opinion. And what they're charging for what they do. I mean, SEMrush, for example, like back in the day, it started out free, and then at one point it was $20 a month. Now it's just extremely expensive relative. I mean, I know that there's inflation. It's been a long time, but it's really tools are really, really like the price of tools has gone up exponentially, and so the value, it's more, to me, the question is more about like the value that you get out of it and whether you're actually going to use the information. Because a lot of times you'll pay for a tool and you won't even use, like, you don't even have time to use it, and that's just not going to be worth it, right?
Yeah, and that's why I tell my students often where, let's say SEMrush is just too expensive, but you know what? If you've got like, 2 or 3 projects lined up, just buy a month of it, right? And then use it out as much as you can within that month and then, move on. You don't have to sign up to a tool for a year.
Yeah.
And that could help.
Yeah, for sure. So, like, knowing what you're trying to get out of the tool, and then knowing what that value is to you before you pay for it. Yeah, but then there's also tools that before you can even try it, they'll make you sign up for a year of it. And yeah, don't get me started on that. That's a different, that's a different type of podcast.
Yes. Different podcast. I think here's an interesting situation that a lot of agencies or consultants come to where, like, let's say you have an account that started out with an ad spend budget of $1,000 a month or, something low. But after running for a couple of months, you're constantly maxing out the budget early in the month. And you're doing a pretty good job. There's always that feeling like, I don't want to tell them to spend more. They don't, I don't want to try to think like all I'm doing here is, trying to get them to spend more. So how do you approach a client usually about increasing budget? And then after that, once approved, what strategy approach do you take when implementing a budget increase?
If the campaign is doing well, it's really easy to have that conversation, at least in my experience. And it's not, it's about performance, right? Because we're creating marketing campaigns because we're wanting sales. And if there are sales, then we should do more of it. And that to me is a very easy conversation, because if the volume exists, that's the first part. If the volume exists, there's demand for it, and you can project what the incremental revenue sales are going to be, then that conversation is super easy and a fun one to have.
But sometimes you have a group, like, so when it's e-com, it's pretty straightforward, right?
Yes.
But sometimes in like these lead gen campaigns, it's not exactly clear. It's not 100, so I guess in those cases, it's a little bit harder where it's like, you're seeing the leads are coming through, but you're not exactly sure the conversion rate of those leads, but, budget is limited. So I guess in those cases, it's going to be a little bit harder.
It depends on how long the campaign has been running for, right? So if it's only been running for a month or two, that may not be enough time to have a good sense of what performance is going to be. If you have a relatively good conversion rate for the industry, then and it depending so okay, the first a couple of things I would look at, right? So what the CPL is looking at, like what the current like CPL to like what the to acquisition, what that conversion rate looks like. If there's any, if there's none, then what do we think it's going to be? What is our current share of voice of the traffic that exists, and what does our visibility look like? And so knowing that information can help you determine, are we spending enough money, right? Or do we have a good enough chunk of it for this to be a good test? How do we feel about the quality of the leads? Even if they're not converting, there has to be a sense as to whether the leads are of good quality or not,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're talking to potential customers. And the answers to that question, those questions will help determine whether how long a test and what the budget should be and whether a budget increase should happen. If the traffic volume, like we're getting maybe 10% traffic share and the visibility is relatively low, then to me, that's a pretty easy suggestion, right? Hey, I don't think we're spending enough money to be competitive here, right? We barely show up. We're not getting, we're getting a lot of clicks or paying, but for this set of keywords, for this industry, it's the right budget is probably X amount more based off of this traffic, right?
So when you do get an increase, what's the strategy to implementing that increase? Like, do you throw it in all at one time? Do you spread it out? How does that work?
With budget increases, I typically like to this is definitely a personal approach kind of thing. Everybody's going to do this a little different. I tend to prefer doing it more conservatively. That's just how I usually like to do this. Some people will throw it all in right away just because they want a quick read on it. It's going to depend on the client too, right? You're going to work together and be sure that you're aligned with what we want to do with the extra budget. So sometimes the client will be of like wanting to get the results really fast, and then you're like, oh, I don't know about that, and so there needs to be alignment there as well. But typically, I like to go in slowly and see. And I want to say that it takes generally a year to really get a good idea of what your paid search campaign is gonna how it's gonna perform. Like you want to have at least a good solid year of good volume to have a good enough data set to make decisions off of.
Would you recommend that people who do want to get into paid search for their business, ideally they should try to look at this as like a 12-month endeavor?
Yes. 12-month, what is it like, what are you willing to just try and see?
And do you feel like even like, let's say you got a specific budget, is it better to spread it out over those 12 months? Or is it better to like use it up, let's say larger amounts for a short amount of time? Do you have, is there any difference there?
It depends on what the business is, but generally speaking, I think it's going to be better for you to have a longer duration of information than like a short burst of a lot of traffic. I'm going to generally lean towards, and this is my personal preference, a longer time. Be spreading it, having it a little thinner, but having it over a longer duration.
Yeah, I agree. And especially when seasonality comes into play, you just have more of chances to, either win or lose.
Mhm.
In a shorter duration, you're not going to see it as much.
Yeah, and it's just less risky because it's just at any point in time there's always that cash flow question, right? And you're just it's just less risk.
Yeah, it's not that this is an investing podcast, but it's like, do you throw all your money in at the beginning of the year, or do you invest a little bit, over the time, and when you keep on investing over time, that helps because you get the highs and the lows.
Yeah.
You don't, yeah.
That's not to say that, you can't get any wins out of doing the show first, but that's my personal opinion on that.
Yeah. Love it. All right, it's time for our lightning round. So to let everyone know that not only are you an amazing digital marketer, but you're also an amazing mom. And let's talk about your top kids movies. And it could be things that you're watching now, or it could be like back when you were a kid. Like what movies did you really like?
Right now, I am watching Charlotte's Web. I'm reading the book and watching the movie. Finding Nemo. We watched Charlie and the Chocolate Factory recently, and we also watched Babe. I love Babe. The message in Babe is so good, and that's just these are all these movies have stood the test of time, in my opinion, and have really good messages that I want my kids to learn.
And I love it. So you're reading the book and you're watching. Is that something you often do with the kids?
Yeah, so my oldest, Dylan, he is 8, and we're trying to help him with reading comprehension and his vocabulary. And so I just find that when we read the book and then we watch the movie and we do it together, it really helps seal in the message for him. And, sometimes, like for example, in Charlotte's Web, the word trough, it shows up a lot. Like, Wilbur's trough was full. And and so he doesn't know what a trough is. And you can explain it to him, right? You can look at the dictionary definition, but the visual of the trough and the slots going into it, that's where you get the comprehension, right?
Yeah.
So
what's the next big thing in the world of digital marketing that you're setting your eyes on?
so right now, I'm continuing to grow my analytical skills. So, more expanding outside of the marketing realm. So, more moving into business analytics, which encompasses marketing as well. It's really a lot of the same thing. The goal is the same. The fundamentals are the same, and the goal is to make better data-driven decisions in the shortest amount of time possible to drive performance, right? But at a greater scale. So that's really I'm working on like my SQL and Python skills, and then just like the tools that connect data together. And that's next step for me.
Are you using ChatGPT at all to help you with some of that, some of the queries?
Yeah. So yes, I have been. ChatGPT is really cool. It's sometimes it's really scary, and then sometimes it just completely gets it wrong. So I think that if you understand, like for somebody who understands an area really well, and it's a really good shortcut to just getting answers really fast, right? But for somebody who doesn't really know a lot about an area, it could be really wrong. So proceed with caution.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But definitely when you're looking, I know you were talking more about SQL, but when you're looking for that formula in Excel, it's just a lot easier to ask ChatGPT than have to go and search on the internet.
For sure. The speed at which we're moving right now is so crazy.
It is crazy. Well, Caroline, thank you so much today. Such a great conversation. It's always a pleasure as usual. Thank you for being a guest on the Digital Marketing Mentor. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Digital Marketing Mentor. We'll speak with you next time.
Thank you, Danny, for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.